Elijah stared at the tray in front of him. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Just sat there, eyes locked on 5 handwritten words scrawled across the meal label in red marker. African Amine Special. Sensitive case. Not printed. Not a barcode. A message. A message someone chose to write. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached slowly into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, retrieved his phone, and snapped a single photo. No flash, no dramatic angle, just quiet documentation. Then he pressed the call button overhead. Tracy, the same flight attendant who had earlier handed him the tray with a practiced smile and a dismissive tone, reappeared. Her face faltered when she saw the look on his. Calm, centered, but absolute. Who wrote this? He asked, holding up the tray like evidence. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Tracy hesitated. I'm not sure, sir. The meals are labeled in the galley. He cut her off. Pre-labeled meals don't include fresh marker. This was handwritten. Recently. Who labeled this? She tried to gather herself. It might have been a note for inventory. Look me in the eyes, Elijah said, and tell me if you believe that. Her face tightened, the color draining slightly. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Elijah gave a curt nod. Thank you, he said, dismissing her. She stepped back, retreating with awkward silence, and he returned his attention to the tray. He didn't touch the food. He didn't even unwrap the cutlery. He left it untouched, a sealed symbol of something far larger than airline protocol. That tray wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror, one that reflected every unspoken bias, every assumption, every policy masked as procedure but soaked in prejudice. And what none of them knew, not Kendra, not Brent, not Paul Redford or the crew, was that this moment, that tray, that label had done something their entire system hadn't accounted for. It had awakened the part of Elijah Cole they didn't see coming. The part that didn't just endure injustice, but documented it, calculated it, and responded to it with power. By the time the plane landed, the wheels weren't the only thing touching ground. So was the truth. He didn't leave through the front of the plane. No offer was made. Of course not. He exited through the rear, again. But this time, when he stepped onto the arrival bridge, his mind wasn't stuck on rage. It was focused, precise, surgical. A uniformed man waited for him just past the terminal doors. Mr. Cole, the man said, with a clipboard tucked under one arm. Could I have a quick word before you head to baggage? Elijah raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Just a heads up, sir. If you decide to submit a complaint, well, too many notes on a customer's file, even ones not their fault, can result in their account being flagged. High-risk passenger. Just procedural stuff. Nothing personal. Elijah stared. So let me get this straight, he said, voice cold steel. I get removed from a seat I purchased. Humiliated. Lied to. Labeled. And now you're warning me that if I speak up, I might be punished again. The man shifted uncomfortably. It's just how the system works. No, Elijah said firmly. It's how you've let the system work. He turned, walked away. And when he stepped outside into the California sun, he was already making calls. Not to customer service, but to legal. Not to write a review, but to rewrite the structure of an entire airline. Less than 72 hours later, the executive floor at Alara Holdings was a battlefield in silence. Computers locked. Keycards disabled. Dozens of names flagged under ethics review. Careers erased not by scandal, but by a photo of a meal tray and a single decisive action. Elijah didn't ask for an apology. He authored a reckoning. And when Paul Redford was summoned to the boardroom, Elijah didn't stand. He just slid a document across the table and said, "You flagged me as suspicious because I didn't look like someone who belonged in seat 1A. That was your mistake. But letting that mistake define your system? That was your failure." Paul's lips parted, searching for words. Elijah didn't give him the chance. You don't get to hide behind procedure. Not anymore. And in that quiet room, overlooking the skyline of a city that had once tried to box him in, Elijah Cole didn't just reclaim his seat. He reassigned everyone else's. Paul didn't speak. Couldn't. His eyes dropped to the document in front of him. On the page were signatures, timestamps, and policy references. But it wasn't the bureaucracy that silenced him. It was the line at the bottom, effective immediately, position terminated pending final compliance hearing. Elijah stood, slow and measured. He didn't raise his voice. Power didn't need volume. You weren't punished because you made a mistake, he said, gaze pinned on Paul. You were held accountable because you defended that mistake with arrogance. You looked at me and saw a profile that didn't match your narrative. But here's the thing, narratives change. And today, yours ends here. Paul rose shakily. No more smug posture. No forced professionalism. Just a man dismantled by the very protocol he once weaponized. By the time he left the room, Elijah was already standing by the window, watching the city move below. He didn't smile. There was no victory lap. This wasn't revenge, it was correction. Over the following days, news broke. Quietly at first, then with the force of a landslide. Headlines read, Airline exec reassigned after discrimination scandal. Private stakeholder exposes internal bias through quiet action. From Seat 42E to corporate control, the Elijah Cole story. It was never about going viral. It was about going deep into the roots, the systems, the patterns. Elijah didn't give interviews. He didn't need a spotlight. But he did approve the release of one official statement through Monroe Ventures. Diversity is not optics. It is operational. What happened to me is not unique. That's why it matters. Real equity begins where silence ends. Internally, Alara Airlines announced sweeping structural changes. The new executive review board included independent equity auditors. Cabin crew underwent mandatory implicit bias training designed not by HR, but by external, neutral specialists. They renamed the internal protocol that once flagged Elijah's booking. It was now called the Cole filter, an automated failsafe to cross-check bias-based overrides in all ticket reviews, crew notes, and customer assessments. And on the first flight that rolled out the new protocol, a small placard was placed near the first elite cabin. Every seat is earned by respect, not assumption. Meanwhile, Elijah returned to what he knew best, building, not just businesses, but people. He funded a startup incubator focused entirely on founders from overlooked communities, those denied bank loans, those told their names weren't investor-friendly. He named it Gate 42. In every application packet, there was one unusual question. Have you ever been underestimated? The answers were always illuminating. And once a month, Elijah would personally review each of those responses, not to grade them, but to remind himself that dignity, when quietly reclaimed, becomes a revolution. Brent Halverson now taught a monthly seminar at Hopewell Center on ethical decision-making in real-time operations. He no longer wore a badge. Instead, he wore a worn flannel shirt and an honest heart. He never missed a session. Tracy Delane, who once scribbled 5 deadly words on a meal label, now cooked meals in silence for those who had nothing. She never again picked up a permanent marker. Paul Redford. No one heard much after his removal. But rumor had it he moved out of state, quietly, with a resume that now required an asterisk. As for Elijah Cole, he never returned to Seat 1A. Not because it wasn't his, but because the lesson had already flown farther than any aircraft ever could. He had turned humiliation into reformation, bias into blueprint, and silence into structure. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with a notepad, a photo, and 5 words that were meant to reduce him, but instead redefined a system. And in boardrooms, flight schools, and conference stages across the country, his name carried a weight no label could ever contain. Not African-American special, just Elijah Cole, a man who never needed to raise his voice, because the truth, when spoken with precision, was louder than anything else in the sky.